Dear athletes, I'm writing this letter to you to say thank you for all that you have done to contribute to my research project. Although you might not think that you have contributed much, it is important to me as a researcher and sport professional to emphasize to you how much you have done and actually how much you have forwarded this new area of research. Without you and your experiences, this document would not be what it is. I wanted to create a personal video for the athletes who participated in the study to express my thanks and show how much I am grateful for you and your time. I'm trying to be more connected with people in a time where, as Sherry Turkle states, we seem determined to give human qualities to objects and content to treat each other as things. Having this human connection and follow-up is important. There were so many findings from this project, but this video is made up of the findings that might involve your experience as an athlete and how social media affects you. So, here we go. Some context to the study. This study was created to understand the athlete experience when using social media, and this is because research has shown that 1. Social media has psychological ramifications that influence athletes' behavior. 2. Athletes may not be aware or understand the implications that social media may have. And 3, athletes do not realize that social media platforms have an effect on their mental game and sport performance. 10 athletes were interviewed for this study. The ages ranged between 17 to 25 years old. Athletes were from high-performance individual sports, where there is a focus on the outcome, producing results, measuring performance, comparing to others, and pushing the boundaries of their sport. All athletes were Canadian, and for this reason, this study should be taken within the Canadian context of sport. Okay, so why would social media affect athletes when it has nothing to do with physically competing? Enter Goffman. Irving Goffman is a renowned sociologist and social psychologist who wrote The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, which is what the study is anchored to. In the book, he uses the analogy of the front stage and the backstage of theater to demonstrate how people choose to act to different audiences. The front stage is the appearance that a person creates about themselves to an audience. The backstage is the area where the true intentions of a person are. This is what drives the choices and the performances. Why does this matter? It is an important developmental task of adolescents to integrate many different ideas of identity to one integrated self. Social media might now be playing a role within this developmental process. There are fewer opportunities to express different types of identities of behaviors in the physical environment. People can expand on their sense of identity, but this process takes time and sometimes a change in environment. But the internet and social media provide many more opportunities to experiment and develop identities, possibly because of the quick turnover and the different audiences that someone can self-present to. Long story short, social media has become an extension of self for people's self-expression. What does this mean for an athlete? Figuring yourself out is a really challenging task. Being an athlete is already a huge part of this process. The presentation of self to the world is highly conscious in how it is constructed and managed. However, there are a lot of opportunities that come with being an athlete in the age of social media. Through self-presentation, you can gain a following and have people interested in following your sport career. What's also interesting is that you don't have to be the best athlete to find success in your sport. Research states that athletes can create a presentation through having a decent athletic performance, attractive appearance, and a marketable lifestyle. We can see this through real-life examples such as Olivia Dunn, who may not be the best athlete in her sport, but is being paid 7 figures through sponsorship and endorsements because of her presentation and following on social media. Creating an athlete brand can open many opportunities such as sponsorships, scholarships, or even being able to represent an organization. However, what comes along with being a brand is the idea of impression management, which is the awareness of how others view your self-presentation, which then becomes more goal-oriented and directed for a particular purpose. Your self-presentation starts to become impacted by the message you want to present for others, not necessarily how you feel about yourself. Any poorly planned posts can generate off-message judgments that have consequences for athletes. There are many examples of this happening in the media. So what are the findings of this particular study? Use and have. There are different ways of using social media, which was distinguished by the idea of use and have. All athletes had numerous social media accounts, but each athlete approached social media differently. Use was dictated by the idea that you had to post on social media, while have appeared to suggest that athletes didn't post on social media, but still liked to observe other people on social media, even though this is still using social media. Presentation of self. When the athletes discussed the idea of presentation of self, suggested by Goffman, it was clear that the athletes understood that they are being observed, that they felt that they had to be more out there for others, and expressed how they had to be very careful about the way they portray themselves on social media. It was even suggested that by not having a presentation on social media, that was a presentation in itself, and that athletes might miss out on opportunities or gain an edge over opponents if they did not self-present. Identity. There are a few ways that athletes expressed how they managed their athletic persona on social media. There were athletes who preferred to separate their athletic image from the rest of their image. The athletes who did not separate their image managed their image differently. Some athletes had trouble with the idea of what qualified as a personal post or a professional post. Others did not understand what was meant about managing identities, suggesting a solidified self-concept. Meanwhile, other athletes chose not to post anything on social media. The different uses could suggest where athletes are in different stages of their identity development, or instead choosing to manage different audiences instead of different aspects of identity. It is unknown what the impact of embodying a brand through the adolescent identity development process is, but athletes should be made aware that this is occurring and perhaps understand the idea of separating audiences is quite useful. Construction of self. Many of the athletes were mindful of what they wanted to portray on social media. Some athletes comparing their self-presentation to work, where they had to monitor their audience's impressions. Interestingly, athletes emphasized that they had to self-present and construct an image of themselves online in order to compete with other athletes in their sport. By self-presenting on social media, it created the impression that they were a good athlete. Many athletes thought audiences would judge them as lesser skilled than their opponents or just assume that they were a terrible athlete, based only on their social media presentations. Actually, only one athlete expressed how they didn't believe that having an image on social media would provide opportunities. They expressed how their skill would speak for itself. This might be true if the athlete was a top-tier athlete in their sport and could rely on only their athletic success to gain a following. Interacting with followers was also mentioned as being a big part of self-presentation and was something that athletes felt they had to do. Athletes expressed how interacting and building a bond with the audience actually differentiates you from other athletes and can sometimes help with performances. Observing opponents' constructions. All athletes thought they were using social media better than their opponents, stating that they didn't think their opponents knew how to use social media or weren't posting content of substance. They thought their opponents were really into themselves or forgetting the purpose of their training. Although one athlete admitted how it was nice to receive validation from others for their effort and hard work. Since athletes have this insider knowledge on their opponents that the general audience does not usually have, it might be the reason why they are taking such a critical approach to their opponents' posts. It could be that the athletes were overconfident in their own social media use and self-presentation, some suggesting that they are still learning and none suggesting that they could improve upon it. The front stage versus the backstage. Athletes stated that there is a huge focus on wanting to only present the ideal of what they want others to see, but there is no purpose to trick or lie through their self-presentation on social media. But posting only select and curated content is a type of performance that creates a false impression without putting the performer in an indefensible position of having performed a bold-faced lie. This is evident when athletes accept that what they see on social media is not necessarily the full truth. Through accepting that the presentation they are viewing is only part of the truth could also be linked to the idea of mutual deceits, where each person acknowledges there is a lie but accepts that it is part of the game, and that by using social media you opt into this game. But even though this is accepted, it seems to have significant implications for athletes, which is only viewed and experienced in the physical environment. For instance, it made athletes think differently about upcoming performances, some stating they were having more anxiety leading up to competition. Athletes also discussed how social media was a form of distraction in regard to their performances in many ways. a distraction with focusing on others and not themselves, a distraction from the present moment, and a distraction as a form of escapism. It was also suggested that athletes were kind of longing to compete without social media like athletes competed back in the day. The athletes who were stating that they were using it to play the game and post a presentation on social media to help them were also not happy with it. Athletes stated that there was a pressure to perform because of the image that they had to put out there. They felt a constant assessment from others, and they felt that their image was hard to live up to at points. And some athletes suggested that the outcome of their performances and the way they presented themselves on social media did affect their sense of self. Within skill appraisal and how athletes saw their own abilities and skill, they did acknowledge that there is a huge problem with not seeing the non-framed aspects of posts. And this is partly due to the athletes feeling an enhanced self-comparison to others. That seeing opponents' posts actually created self-doubt in themselves, and that athletes had less trust in their own athletic process because seeing opponents' posts made them want to change what they were doing. When discussing the positives of social media with athletes, the athletes didn't really understand how social media benefited them. One reference to a benefit was that there was a lot more content that athletes could use to study their opponents for upcoming performances. But it was unclear if the pros outweighed all the other issues that the athletes were expressing. It should also be emphasized that there is limited social media training for athletes, which is a huge concern. Athletes have little awareness of how social media affects them and have no help in using it. They are trying to figure it out on their own while balancing their own sport performance. It's a lot for one person to do. Thank you for watching, and please reach out if you have any questions or want to know more about this topic. The purpose of this project was not to generate how-to solutions, but a big problem is that there is limited research on the effect that social media has on athletes and how it affects their performance. With this research, it is a step towards understanding social media's influence on athletes and what sport professionals can do to help athletes. While it's important to understand athletes' perspectives on social media, it is also important for athletes to recognize social media's impact on them. But there is a lot more that we need to know about it, and social media is evolving at a very rapid pace with very limited awareness from athletes, coaches, and sport professionals on the impact social media has on athlete well-being.